Hello and welcome back to our live coverage of the UN Climate Talks. I'm delighted to say I've been joined by Anna Collins, who is a veteran of these talks. She's been going to them more than half the negotiators, I think. Anna, you've been in Copenhagen, you've been in Barcelona, you've come to Bonn, and now you're in China. What's happened this week?
It's been kind of a slow week at the UNFCCC, but I guess quite a lot of the weeks here seem like that. We've had lots of discussions about the process again, which is really frustrating because it means they're not actually talking about what they're going to do to solve climate change. They're talking about how they're going to talk about solving climate change. We had some blockages in one of the tracks, the KP track, which is where they discuss emissions reductions this week. We've had some countries not wanting to proceed with these discussions. China and Brazil didn't want to proceed with them.
Why?
Because they thought there was no point in having these discussions when some of the bigger discussions weren't happening, like how much we're actually going to reduce emissions. And it was in a group where they were talking about lots of legal things. It was lots of lawyers sat in a room, and they didn't want to talk there when we actually weren't talking about the substance in the negotiation tracks. But we've just had closing plenary in the KP, which is like the meeting where they all come back together and say...
KP is Kyoto Protocol?
Yeah, emission reductions for developed countries, that's where those are discussed. And yeah, we just had the closing plenary, which is the meeting where they all make statements, like pre-prepared statements, no actual negotiations, just saying their position at the end of the week. And it was pretty standard stuff, nothing's, we haven't agreed to save the world, but at the end of the session, John Ash, who's the chair, the guy who sits at the front and makes sure they all keep to order, thanked Brazil and China. So we have actually seen a little bit of an unpicking of that knot, and hopefully some of those things can start to move forward.
Okay, so what's the good news from this week? Where are the good stories? We've heard that there's climate finance and adaptation kind of haven't moved backwards, and that maybe there's hopes for some kind of climate fund being set up in Cancun or shortly afterwards. So it's not all bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's very you get stuck inside a bubble when you're here, and you tell people like, oh, we didn't move backwards, it was great, and like, other people are like, oh my god, like what? Surely you should be moving forward. So yeah, some things are going okay. This balanced package idea, which is what everybody's talking about, could have some good things in it. Like if we put the effort in, if countries actually come to Cancun prepared to negotiate properly on some of these things, we might see them happen. Forests might get something for forests, finance, as you said. We need to make sure that what we get is actually, we don't just want anything for the sake of getting anything. So there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that, especially in terms of forests, we've seen here this week rules trying to be set where basically it's not good for the forest. I mean, it's all very policy wonky stuff, but it's not good for forests. Those have tried to be set in place here. We need to make sure that doesn't happen. We can get good things in Cancun if we do that, but we need to make sure that we don't just get things for the sake of them, but we actually get a really good package for the climate, for the world.
And you and I were among a group of people who went and had a chat with Christiana Figueres this morning. She's the executive secretary of the kind of UN climate talks. We'll bring you that video hopefully later in the show. We're just trying to use the somewhat unreliable internet connection here to get it back to the UK for you. But what did you make of her?
I really liked it. The trackers, the Adapt Negotiator project, we've been lucky enough to have meetings with the executive secretary at most of the sessions we've gone to. So we had a lot of meetings with Ivo, who was the old secretary, and they changed in July. And he was great, but Christiana was just really full of life, and she actually inspired the trackers. I mean, this is the last day of the UNFCCC talks. Normally we're all despairing, depressed, like wandering around in a daze, and we went into the meeting this morning and we came out and everybody was smiling and they were happy and excited, and it was because she was really inspiring as a person. She knew the faults of the process. She knew where the problems were. She's been a negotiator, so she knows what it's like to argue over a comma. But she was optimistic and she put things in perspective. She really believes that we're in the middle of this transformation for the world, this big transformation that this is a part of, but it's going to take time. And if it takes a few years to get it, then she says that's okay, and she believes we will get there. And I just really liked her because she is a woman from the global south. It's unusual for that kind of person to be at the top of an institution like the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And in the halls, we mostly see older guys in suits. But she hasn't conformed to that way of working. She's not trying to be a man. She's not working in a man's way. She's definitely a woman. She has great fashion sense. She speaks like a woman, and she has a lot of emotion and feelings, which I've always said is what this process is lacking. So I'm excited to see what she does over the next few years with the role, and maybe pushes us towards something a little bit better for people, something that takes into account why we're actually here, which is solving climate change, not talking about when we're going to have a meeting.
It was amazing, actually, the feeling of energy as everybody came out of the room, because we've been there before when you've chatted to Ivo, and he's a really nice guy and gets his points across very well, but perhaps more of a diplomat, whereas Christiana seemed really authentic, I thought.
Yeah, definitely. She seemed like a real person with feelings and emotions. And, she laughed, she was excited, she got angry at points, and she was so excited about what we were doing as well, which is really nice. She really cares about and really wants to see civil society engaged in this process, which is a really good thing. She was very keen to know what we were doing on Sunday for 10-10-10, and yeah, she was really excited. It's brilliant.
And you've been to a lot of these conference centres now, and this one is almost certainly the most impressive, I would guess. But the fact that this conference has been in China, has that kind of changed anything as far as you're concerned? I guess there's no protests outside. It might be something that is a little different. But what about inside the convention centre, the tone of the talks? Would you know that you're in China when you're in here? Or
I think you would know you're in China for the sheer amount of Chinese people wandering around. I mean, there's 1.4 billion people in China, and that means they can mobilise a lot of people. I think all the volunteers, they just said in plenary, are from one of the local universities, so there's loads of them wandering around. You don't get that in any other conference centre. It's so helpful. I mean, I think being in China, the best thing is definitely its people. In terms of facilities and things, it's very similar, normal kind of stuff. The internet has obviously been more of a problem here for social networking. The Negotiator project, we're all about social networking. We've had problems accessing some things, but we've got around a lot of that, and it's been interesting. It's been a different experience.
Maybe we'll use this opportunity on behalf of both of our websites for our inadequacies on Twitter and Facebook relative to our normal prolific flow.
I mean, it's been like stepping out of the real world, not being able to go on Facebook. But
stepping out of the real world, or stepping back into it, perhaps.
Especially, but on the Facebook, you can actually get on the UNFCCC computers, and all the trackers were in the computer room earlier, and we saw Jonathan Pershing in there, who is the USA lead negotiator. So there was lots of talk about whether he had gone in just to use Facebook, because you don't normally see the lead negotiators on the UN computers.
Adam is your friend.
We did think about it.
And so we're now a couple of months away from a final kind of end of year conference of parties, the big kind of climate talks where they're supposed to sign off some impressive stuff. Are we going to see much, or should we just not bother going and wait to South Africa? What's going to happen?
Well, the UNFCCC word of the week, you should have a little segment, I think, on these shows, is a balanced package, which basically means that they, at these conferences in December, Conference of the Parties they're called, they're the only place they can actually make decisions. Like, they can't decide anything here, they can only work towards decisions. And once a year, at a Conference of the Parties, they can make decisions. And so we're hoping to see some decisions in December made, COP decisions they'll be called, and they'll go together to form this balanced package. I mean, balance is a word that they've all been throwing around, and they haven't clarified what they mean. For us, a balanced package will be one that, works for the planet, the people on it, works balance between developed and developing in terms of good for all of us, with everyone doing their fair share, not balanced as in trading off, we'll have this if you don't have this. And we might see that, hopefully we will see that, and it's important to get that, to prove that this process can get something. There's lots of talk of how the UNFCCC is rubbish, it's a terrible process, but that's not true. The problem is the people inside the process. Consensus is how they work, and for consensus to work, you have to put your individualness aside and come together for the good of the greater group. So you work for a decision that works for all of you, and in doing so, you get a decision that everybody buys into because everyone feels like they've been hurt. So we need this process. We don't have anything else like it. The G20, the Major Economies Forum, they all have similar problems. They're not working any better. We need the UNFCCC so smaller countries can feel like they've had their say, but we need it to work. So we really need some decisions in Mexico in December so we can move forward knowing and having faith in the process and working towards the legally binding deal that we can get if we keep trying.
Let's keep our fingers crossed and carry on fighting. Anna, I'm going to hand back to the studio in the UK, but thank you very much for joining us, and we'll get your next update in Cancun, I imagine, in Mexico at the end of this year. But for now, back to the UK.